Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. If you're in Europe, good morning or good evening. If you're elsewhere, welcome. We're letting people into this webinar at the moment. So it's my happy responsibility to welcome you to this 1 hour webinar on teenage career preparation in England. Over the next hour, we're going to be talking about how well young people in England are preparing for their futures in work. As people come in, please do find a space. Keep an eye on the chat. Today, to coincide with this webinar, we're launching a new publication, Teenage Career Development in England, a review of the PISA 2022 data. And you can click on that to get a link through to the full publication, all 96 pages of it. And that's the background to what we're talking about today. So in this session, over the next hour, you're going to have a lot of opportunity to learn, I think, two main things, maybe three. One is you're going to learn about what PISA has to offer in terms of career development, because PISA is well known for many things, but it's not that well known for what it has to say about career development. It says an awful lot, particularly PISA 2022. We also have an opportunity to learn an awful lot about the career development system within England. And in the United Kingdom, education has devolved between the 4 different nations. And so in England, we have a very particular approach, and we're going to learn about what it's been providing to young people. But also we have speakers with us from the English Department for Education, Alex Isles, who's going to be talking with us, and from the Careers and Enterprise Company, which is the government agency which is really responsible for driving career guidance in England, Lucy Heseltine. So we're going to be hearing from them. We're going to make a proper start just in 1 moment as more people come in. Feel free to use the chat to say hello and where you're from. When we last looked at our registration list, we had people from 62 different countries, which is great to see you all here. We expect more people to watch on video, but I am now going to share my screen and we are going to make a start. So there's a lot to get through over these next 58 minutes or so. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. I'm going to start off this presentation by talking to you about this study. And I'm going to share with you some of the highlights from it. And then I'm going to ask Alex and Lucy to respond. And we'll talk about some of the things which we found and we understand particularly interesting about the situation in England. So as I say, this relates to an OECD publication, which you can access through the internet. My name, by the way, as you can see, is Anthony Mann. I lead our career readiness team. And this work, we're very grateful to acknowledge the support of the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. They have put a lot of investment into supporting career development for youth, and they have underpinned this work. So let me, firstly, you can't come to an OECD webinar without having a few sort of little notifications. Be aware that we do an awful lot around career readiness. You can find a whole series of working papers and policy briefs and all sorts of issues. If you're interested in the use of digital technologies in career guidance, next week we have a symposium on the use of digital technologies. You can sign up, it's free. If you're interested in our work, send an email to that address at the bottom of the page, careerreadiness@oecd.org, and we'll sign you up to our mailing list and we'll keep you in touch with the publications and events which we organise. Particularly, have a look at Odyssey. This is our standalone resource observatory, which is looking at what's happening in digital technologies and guidance for youth. But the real reason we are here today is to talk about what's happening in terms of career development. And I need to give you a little bit of context to begin with, because many of you will know PISA. Many of you will have looked at the PISA league tables for reading, for mathematics, for science, compares the academic ability of students. But PISA is also a very useful resource for understanding the career development of students. There are over 1,000 questions and variables which we can look at. PISA segments our population by a wide range of characteristics for students, and it includes around 30-odd questions which are very relevant to career development. And these are questions which we can do some very useful things with. We can segment the population in terms of responses across a wide range of equity areas. We can look at their social economic status. We use this acronym ESCS, the social economic status, but we can look at gender, look at whether they're foreign born, they're native born. We can look at their location. In England, in the UK, we look at the type of school they attend to. It's not just whether it's a private or a public school, but we can look whether it's a maintained school, it's an academy. We can look at further education colleges, and we've got big data. We've got big data. Thousands of students take part in this process. And here we're going to share with you data from 2022. That's the last time it was collected. But PISA itself goes back to 2000. In some areas, we can see, kind of all the way through. Looking from 2000 to 2022, look at some of the long-term trends. Now, I just need to share with you as well a brief slide to talk about the conceptual lens through which we look at data like this. Now, in career guidance and career development, it's historically been very difficult to really understand what works. What are the types of interventions which really make a difference to young people? And a couple of years ago, we did something which at that time, and still is, unprecedented. We spent a lot of time and money looking at all the available longitudinal data sets. These follow cohorts of students from their teenage years or younger through into the world of work, typically between 15 and 25. And we looked to see what evidence we could find that having better outcomes in work linked to forms of career development. And you'll see we're going to keep coming back to some of these particular aspects of career development, which we see as particularly important. Because what we found was that we found between about 10 and 14 really areas where we had really solid evidence, multiple countries, strong outcomes, often in terms of lower NEET rates, lower youth unemployment, higher wages, higher career satisfaction. And we grouped them in terms of how young people explore, experience, and think about their futures in work. And so that gives you kind of a background. If you're interested in that analysis, go to our website, you'll be able to find lots on it. But for today, we're looking at the results for England in terms of PISA, in terms of career development. This is the name of the publication. You can find it, on our iLibrary. Just put in teenage career development, OECD. I'm sure you'll find that in England. And let me start by sharing with you, I think perhaps a key slide which people are going to be interested in, which is the participation of young people in career development activities. Now, here, kind of what we see is a comparison between England and the OECD averages. And so England's a stronger bar, OECD average, 37 other countries, kind of the more economically advanced, sort of liberal economies, which we see the United States, Canada, Germany, France, and so on. And what we find is that England actually compares pretty well in terms of participation in some real key activities. And so if you think, we've got some of these indicators, many of them relate to active engagement with people in work. England does, okay on internship, does well in terms of job fairs. It doesn't do so well in terms of worksite visits or job shadowing. But in other areas, we see more likely to speak to guidance counsellors, students being active themselves and using the internet to research things. And we've got a final question here, which wasn't asked in other countries. In this survey, the individual countries got the opportunity to ask additional questions. In England, they asked, got advice about alternative studies to A-levels. Nearly 70% of students at age 15 to 16, the age when PISA is completed, said yes, that happened to them. And we can look here in terms of, kind of our comparison between 2018 and 2022. And so you look here, so the first two bars are what's happened in England, the second two bars are what's happening across the OECD. And we can see that in general, kind of England is, kind of continually to do well against OECD averages. You have to remember that this was a period of the pandemic, of COVID. We see in some areas, possible effect in that. In England, we see that the proportion of young people who say they had job shadowed or visited work sites decreased quite a lot between 2018 and 2022. But it's noticeable that across the OECD, we see an increase here. So maybe there were pandemic effects, but other countries may have been able to find a way around them. But we see a general sort of kind of steady increase in terms of participation in these key career development activities, which is a good thing to see. And we actually, in PISA 2022, we asked some new questions here, which are all about students' perceptions of obstacles and barriers, to them. And again, we give you kind of OECD averages. England is coming in, at a pretty similar level to, kind of OECD averages here. You can see they're sort of pretty comparable. But there's some interesting things here I want to point out. Now, when we looked at those, kind of career readiness indicators, there was a group of them which are around the ways that young people think about their kind of futures in work. And, what we see is that, at age 15, certain attitudes go on to be related with worse employment outcomes you'd expect with somebody with that social background, that gender, that level of academic attainment. And, one of them in particular I want to point out here is about extrinsic motivation, the belief that working hard at school will help you do well. And what we find is that, about a third of students, maybe a quarter of students in England and across the OECD say that education has been a waste of time. More low SES students than high SES students. And that kind of gives us a concern. And we see here that, well, more students believe that school, has done little to prepare me for adult life. And that's, these are quite high figures. So students are engaging in their career development activities, but they're not necessarily gaining the confidence that they're going to be able to, kind of overcome their barriers or be able to draw really strong connections between what they're doing in school and who they imagine they might become. Because, these are the positive effects. And remember, there are all these groups over here, all the students who said no, to these answers. They didn't think their schools were doing that. But compared to other countries and across the OECD, England is comparing well. Now, one of the key questions we always ask students in PISA is, what type of job do you expect to have when you're about 30? Now, we use this to distinguish whether students are more certain or uncertain about their occupational plans. Now, you might think that, 15, 16 is quite young to do that. But historically, we've asked this question continually for the last 20 years. About a quarter of students say they don't know. We know that it's not just that they're being a bit lazy and they don't want to write in an answer, because we check to see if they write in answers about their parental occupations, for example. Now, between 2018 and 2022, we've seen a very significant rise in uncertainty. And that rise is much higher in England than it is kind of across the OECD. And, that's something that we're worried about. We would worry about, because multiple longitudinal studies would show that if you follow your cohort of students from age 15 to age 25, uncertainty is something which is, which is a problem. It works against having better employment outcomes if you can control for all their background characteristics. Now, you don't necessarily expect them to have a fixed idea or a permanent idea, but if they have an idea, then that's a very positive indication that they're actively thinking about their future, thinking about their education, how the two can relate, and how they can make good investment decisions of their time, their energy, their money, sometimes, in terms of building a profile through the education system, which can allow them to progress towards where they want to go. And we'll return to this because there's some important equity issues in terms of uncertainty. We also so in that question we ask, what type of job do you expect to do when you're about 30? We have very similar responses. We have which we group into the top 10 popular occupational expectations for boys and girls. This is girls. You compare here to the OECD average. Now, about 47% of girls in England say they're going to work in 1 to 10 jobs. Now, that figure, might seem a lot, but it's pretty typical actually across the OECD. We find a quite heavy concentration of career expectations for boys and girls. And remember, it's the job you expect to have rather than that you want to have or you wish you'll have. One thing to notice here amongst the girls, and we'll come back to this, is that many of these jobs here are the sorts of jobs that you need a university education, to achieve. And we find that is a pattern in many countries, that students are actively choosing to imagine themselves going into jobs which are enabled through programs of vocational education and training. So if you look at the boys, the level of concentration is still very similar to the OECD average. In England, as across the OECD, about 1 in 12 boys say they're going to be a professional sports person. But again, we see sort of like concentration, and we see a high representation of engineers, lawyers, doctors. These are kind of the sorts of jobs which typically require university education, sometimes a postgraduate education. And we've only got, kind of one job here, but you'll see that this is a bit of a similar pattern. Countries do vary. Countries with stronger vocational education systems have a richer mix of the sort of jobs which you might get through either academic, post-secondary education, or through training programs. And then we look to, we can group, kind of the jobs which people say they're going to do by there's an international standardized classification system for occupations, and it groups the sorts of jobs we have in our labour markets into 10 different sectors. And we find here that there's a really strong concentration of young people's ambitions in terms of becoming a senior manager or working in one of the professions. Now, about 70% of young people in England who express an occupational expectation fall into this, kind of higher than our OECD average. We also find about 2/3 of students, I think 64%, say they're going to, continue into tertiary education after they finish secondary education. So that's quite high. And one thing we can do is, kind of ask whether those students who have high ambitions for their occupation also have those high ambitions for their education. And what we look to see is whether students who say they're going to work in a job which typically requires a university education, do they actually plan, to get their university education themselves? And if they don't, we classify that as being misaligned. And again, you can go back to sort of multiple longitudinal cohort studies, which show that, this apparent confusion actually does serve to undermine the transitions of young people. So misaligned young people who underestimate the education which they need to, for their occupational expectation end up doing worse than you'd expect in the labour market 10 years later. So misalignment's been growing, but it's still, not anywhere near the levels of uncertainty. And then when we take these same data about the occupational expectations of students, and we map them against the distribution of people actually in the real jobs market, in the real labour market, you'll see that there's a very stark comparison. Here are our students who say they're going to work in the professions. Now, this has been a growing problem across the OECD. Well, is it a problem? In some ways it is, some ways it isn't. It's not a problem in that, high levels of ambition for your education and occupation are translated to better outcomes for young people. But as I said, there's that big risk of misalignment. And you can see that for every 3 young English people or people in England planning on pursuing a career in the professions, there's only about 1 job. It's about 3 times the level. And this tells us something about kind of the effectiveness of labour market signalling, kind of for young people. And it also, it kind of helps us to understand that there are certain sectors which just aren't signalling well to young people. Now, that could be because they're not attractive jobs or less attractive. Maybe those jobs become less attractive over time. Or it could simply be that, young people are exposed to a narrower range of possible levels of employment, and they focus themselves on those ones which are best known, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a teacher. We're going to talk a bit about equity now over the next just 4 or 5 minutes. Now, we have published recently on equity. There's a good short paper there. There's also a very long paper, which I very much recommend that you might have a look at. But this provides the context for us thinking about equity. And what we find is that when we look at young people's progression into the labour market, what we see is that certain groups with similar levels of academic attainment, similar levels of qualifications, face greater barriers in achieving, certain positions in the labour market which they most desire. And we find that social background has an impact, gender has an impact, migrant status has an impact. In different ways, these play out, but all of them talk to the importance of guidance systems in addressing additional barriers which we can expect to face some students more than other students. Now, returning to uncertainty. Now, uncertainty, we see as a bad thing in quotes, and you can see here that amongst our low performers, over half, are unable to, name an occupation which they expect to have around 30. We particularly worry about the low performers because in many systems, these are the students who are going to leave education earliest. They may not stay on, into upper secondary. They may not stay on into tertiary education. Analysis of PISA data over the years in national context has shown that low performers and we have a classification system for them, are likely to really struggle if they get into tertiary education. Now, they may sort of like imply themselves, they may have had an off day, but we see a strong pattern there. And so low performers are often a real concern in terms of leaving education without a plan, without a vision for themselves. So we see this gap between the high performers and the low performers, notably boys. We find an issue for boys, slightly less so than girls. But low performing, sort of like low SES working class boys, often we see this as an issue. And then if we look at levels of career ambition, one thing which we see here is that ambitions are very high now amongst all students. Perhaps 10, 20 years ago, in many countries, certainly I'm aware of in England, there's a lot of debate about the need to raise aspirations. Now, we don't see similar level aspirations between low SES students and high SES students, but we do see these growing range of aspirations. And this kind of like speaks to this question of misalignment. We find many low performers who, and it's a problem across the OECD as well, many low performers who are very focused on, a small number of jobs in kind of the senior manager, professional careers. And we kind of know from their performance on PISA that there's probably going to be a lot of barriers for them in progressing into those jobs. And so we kind of see, a bit of an equity issue here, because what we can need to look at the low SES high performers, low SES low performers, and so on. But we can see a pattern here, which is a concern. And then if you look at misalignment, again, we kind of see these high percentages of misaligned students, amongst the low performers. But also, it's a low SES issue as well. And so low SES students are much more likely to be misaligned, not understanding what they need to do to achieve the ambitions which they have for themselves. And we see this is more of an issue in England than it is across the OECD. And then let's look at the career development activities by social background. You can see here, so our first bar is low SES, our second bar is high SES. We see pretty consistently across this data that high SES students are more likely to engage in career development activities than low SES students. And we would argue that low SES students, need to be gaining more support because they need access to more information, they need access to more support, particularly because their ambitions are in those high SES areas. It's the professions, that's where you want to get to, but it's going to be less likely that they're going to be able to draw upon the resource which they need, and perhaps within their family backgrounds. And if you look at how things have changed at time, this is quite a busy chart, but I'll just quickly explain it to you. What we look is the patterns here. And what we see is that, some significant variations in patterns. What we look here is to see, is the gap increasing or decreasing? And it's a bit difficult to tell at a glance, but what I can tell you is that in some areas it's decreasing, in some areas it's increasing. And the areas which is increasing tends to be these ones at the top, where you have direct engagement with people in work. And again, our data shows that these are the types of activities we can be most confident of. Of course, there may be other activities not on our list which are valuable. It's just that the evidence is hard to find, and we do have evidence here that these sorts of activities, the job shadowing, the worksite visits, the job fairs, bring people into direct contact with people in work, are particularly effective. And then coming towards an end now, one thing which people are very interested in is the engagement of young people, their interest in working in the skilled trades. These are often professions entered through vocational education. We see England, increasing interest over the years. We saw this big issue in terms of girls. Some countries you'll see 3 or 4 times as many girls being interested in skilled trades as in England, but we do see that there's a growing interest, and some of the gaps with some of the best performing European countries are closing. And then finally, we did a comparative analysis. Now, what we did here is we looked at 3 key areas where our evidence is strong that engagement is really important, which is job shadowing and attending a job fair, where you get the opportunity to speak with people in work, but also to have spoken to a career advisor to help reflect and make sense of that. And you'll see here that England does perform well compared to others. Only Denmark here is really outperforming everybody. England, New Zealand are sort of like, kind of that joint second really, and then everybody else is further behind. Now, our data, when we look at these, this work from longitudinal sets, shows that we should be hoping to get much closer to all students engaging in these sorts of activities by 15, 16. But I think what I've shown you here is that in England, students do engage as much or better in career development activities than students in other OECD countries. But our longitudinal data suggests strongly that this is insufficient career preparation. So England does well if you look across the whole class of OECD countries, but the whole class needs to perform better. And many students in England, as in across the OECD, don't feel well prepared. Uncertainty and misalignment are particularly high in England, and their flags are concerned. And the occupational plans in general might become less concentrated. If you look at those top 10s over time, they're becoming less concentrated, but they're increasingly focused in England on this relatively small area. In terms of equity, England does pretty well in terms of gender, in terms of migrant status, but there are some very real concerns and apparent in terms of lower CS and low performing students. So I'm going to pause there and invite Alex, who is the Head of Careers, Strategy and Infrastructure for the Department of Education in London, to offer a response. And in the meantime, I'd encourage people to put your questions, your observations into the chat, and we'll relay them as best we can. So, Alex, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that introduction, Anthony. And also thank you very much for the presentation, and further thanks to you and OECD colleagues more broadly for the research and the report which you've brought out. It's incredibly timely from our perspective in England to have these findings, particularly following a number of quite big reviews into the career system over the last few years in England. So we've had Sir John Holman's review into the career system. We've also had an Ofsted thematic review, and we've also had an Education Select Committee inquiry into careers. As part of our response to the Education Select Committee, we've committed to publish a new strategic action plan for careers, which we'll be publishing in 2024, and we'll be building on the findings of these reviews and sort of the evidence which we've got shown here. I think I'd just like to start by recognising, as Anthony has, the incredible importance of careers education to our children and young people. And I think that's particularly so in England in the context of a range of changes. We've got some substantial reform of the skills and qualification space over the last years with T-levels, higher technical qualifications, apprenticeships, and the advanced British standard coming over the horizon. And I think similarly to other countries across the world, we're also seeing sort of substantial change in our economy and workplace practices, both through technological changes and also just some behavioural changes following the COVID pandemic. We've also been reforming the career space substantially over the last 10 years, introducing Gatsby benchmarks and funding CEC, who we'll be hearing from in a moment, to support our schools and colleges to achieve these Gatsby benchmarks and deliver excellent careers provision to our young people. I think it's worth reflecting that at a systems level, the reviews we've had have all recognised the strong foundations that we have in place in England. And this was also recognised by OECD in their PISA results, where we found that 95% of schools have formally scheduled careers guidance and well above these OECD national averages. I do think it's fair to reflect, though, that although we've got those sort of strong foundations in place, there's still sort of more to do. We want to do more. We want to do better. The terminology B by some of these recent reviews, and what we want to be doing is thinking about how we can really drive and evolve the system further to move us to an A. So I have a few sort of more few reflections from the analysis and the findings, which I think do also chime with sort of some of our previous find some of the other reports we've got through, so it's really good to have some of that confirmation which we have within there. And I think sort of three sort of big strands which I took away from the report, which we'll be looking to be building through within the strategic action plan, and also just through our continued iterative development, is thinking about the need for greater support for the socially disadvantaged, trying to ensure that we have those careers conversations which start early, breaking down some of those stereotypes, which Anthony showed us in the back end of some of those slides, and also helping support young people to improve their career thinking and ensuring parity of esteem between our academic and vocational routes. So, having heard sort of that sort of very, I feel it's probably worthwhile me quickly handing over to Lucy for a bit of a conversation about what we are doing in the sort of here and now to provide and support our young people with greater education, careers education support. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. Let me just share my screen. Brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lucy Hesseltine, and I'm Senior Manager of Research and Insights with the Careers and Enterprise Company. I'd like to thank the OECD, Anthony in particular, for the opportunity to speak with you today on teenage career readiness, and also the DFE for your ongoing support. The Careers and Enterprise Company is the national body for careers education in England. Our work is at a national scale and is delivered through our network of careers hubs, which you'll be able to see just inside the circle there, that bring together schools, colleges, employers, and apprenticeship providers to share expertise in local areas across England. Young people are at the very heart of everything that we do. Here you can see what modern high-impact careers education looks like. Through partnerships with local businesses and industries, through our network of careers hubs, we leverage available data to identify gaps and align careers education with industry demands, thereby ensuring that careers education is relevant and up to date. By incorporating feedback from employers, we ensure that local needs are met effectively. We engage with students, parents, teachers, and strategic leaders and identify specific skills gaps within local communities, aligning careers interventions to address them. This not only benefits young people by providing them with relevant pathways to pursue their interests, but also supports the economic growth and vitality of local industry. In order to support every young person to take their next best step, careers education needs to be embedded into the core of school and college life, providing students with ongoing support and guidance. Engaging our wide range of stakeholders fosters a culture where students are supported to explore a variety of careers, and this can support them to consider careers in less oversubscribed sectors through early exposure and support. We work to ensure equity of targeted provision for all young people, recognising and promoting the value of technical and vocational pathways as viable options for all students is a priority for the CEC. Students are offered support and guidance to explore and pursue diverse pathways based on their interests and skills. Targeted interventions are used to support students from disadvantaged backgrounds, offering comprehensive information and resources to help them make informed decisions about future pathways. Leveraging partnerships with local and national organisations, the CEC provides additional resources and opportunities for students facing additional barriers, empowering students to overcome these barriers and follow their aspirations, regardless of background or circumstances, core to our mission. So you can see here the 8 Gatsby benchmarks. These indicate what world-class careers provision in education settings look like. The 11 strong predictors of better outcomes and the 9 common career development activities in the PISA report broadly aligned to benchmarks. We've found that students attending schools providing the best careers education, those that achieve all 8 benchmarks, were 8% less likely to be not in education, employment, or training that's need after the age of 18. We've seen good progress against the benchmarks over time, particularly in relation to benchmark 5, which covers encounters with employers and employees, and also benchmark 6, experiences of workplaces. Careers education is a continuum. The benchmarks focus on access to careers advisors and increasingly intensive careers interventions for young people throughout secondary school, increasing in cadence between the ages of 16 and 18. This has a demonstrable effect on young people's skill development, industry interests, and readiness for careers. So I just wanted to share the 3 insights from our most recent publication, which came out in March. This is called Careers Education in England, Now and Next. Our analysis, triangulated across the most extensive data set to date, including data from our 3 key stakeholder groups. That was over 100,000 young people, 4,500 education institutions, and 300 employers. This afforded us a really great opportunity to pinpoint areas for enhancement. Our first insight, young people, outlined how good careers education helps young people to become more career ready and to achieve positive destinations. Parents and teachers are key to getting students ready for their careers. We found that when parents and teachers get more involved, it makes a huge difference. Our second insight, business and the economy, shows that high quality careers education isn't just important for students. It creates value for business and society too. We've been able to hear from employers completing our employer standards about how their engagement with schools and colleges is making a real difference. They're seeing more young people interested in their industries, which means a better prepared and skilled pool of potential employees. And our third insight, closing the gap, outlines how the journey from education to work isn't the same for everyone and shouldn't be. In careers education, some young people encounter more obstacles than others, whether due to economic circumstances, gender, ethnicity, or educational needs. These challenges can intersect in complex ways also, either amplifying existing disadvantages or helping to overcome them. No matter what we measure, like educational achievement, well-being, or employment, economic status plays a significant role. And just kind of to echo what Alex has said, it's not just us saying that the system is working. The Ofsted Independent Review of Careers Guidance in Schools says that career hubs play an important role in ensuring effective employer engagement and contribute to careers programmes. The Education Select Committee, which you already spoke about, they think that the right framework is broadly in place and that the CEC is providing useful support to schools and colleges. The OECD National Report for England, published in the end of last year, said that the approach to career guidance in England was more structured than was typical internationally. And the present PISA report that was published today found that students in England were engaged in the 9 common career development activities to a comparable or greater degree than the average for all but one activity. And we're delighted to see the strength of English careers education shining through in so many areas of the report. Comparing PISA and CEC data allows us to shed light on nuanced differences in terminology comprehension and usage by young people across OECD countries, as well as broader trends in career readiness. The PISA report highlights that in England, as elsewhere across the OECD, there's a substantial disconnect between the occupational expectations of students and actual patterns of demand within the labour market. Our data highlights something similar, where young people exhibit beneficial careers thinking when they have relevant industry or career interests, and the proportion of students who have ideas about what they wanted to do for a job or career in the future remained relatively consistent over year groups. Reinventing work experience to focus on measurable outcomes can support the proliferation of career development. From year 7, students have ideas about their future careers, which mature over time, becoming more grounded in their increasing knowledge and experience of career pathways. By year 11, 83% of students had a plan for their next step, and 79% had support to make education and career choices. We're able to compare the responses of the target cohort of 15-year-olds across similar questions in both the FFQ and PISA datasets. And this allows us a deeper understanding of the impact of early interventions on outcome. Our Future Skills questionnaire surveys young people at key transition points, i.e. from the age of 11 up to 18 and beyond in certain cases. In this way, rather than simply observing a snapshot in time, we can see increases in career readiness, knowledge, skills, and confidence over the course of their schooling, noting particular increases at Key Stage 4 and beyond. We can also measure young people's progress both between key transition points and longitudinally for a subset of students to understand the impact of various career education initiatives on readiness for careers. We can see the lasting effects of COVID-19 on education as a whole, as Anthony already mentioned, particularly for the generation affected by lockdowns. It emphasises the shock to confidence in learning, underscoring the crucial need for catch-up support. Across various metrics around careers education, including the data from 2015, 18 and 22, we observe a consistent decline post-2018, affecting all groups, including advantaged and high-performing students in both England and the wider OECD. This serves as a stark reminder of the pandemic's enduring impact on education, urging swift and targeted intervention. So, in order to address the existing deficits in young people's readiness for careers, we believe there's still work to be done. We've identified 5 best next steps to enhance the career system to do this. First, as we near full coverage of schools and colleges, we're currently at 92% and hoping to hit 100 in the next year or so, our focus shifts to improving quality across the board. The careers impact system offers a solution. This is a peer and expert review process, along with a self-assessment framework to validate GAFE benchmark results and leadership within schools. And this will ensure schools and colleges are delivering and continuously improving quality. Our second priority is to enhance both the quality and quantity of employer engagement, ensuring that business outreach translates into actual recruitment and intake of young people. Effective employer engagement requires investment, and it's crucial that this investment yields results. That's why our evidence-based employer standards are designed to assist businesses in targeting their resources effectively and focusing on high-quality engagement opportunities. Our third focus area is to transform the considerable interest among young people in apprenticeships and technical pathways into actual employment opportunities. To achieve this, we've developed the ATE framework. The framework aims to help everyone understand and overcome the barriers that young people face when transitioning into these pathways. We're currently implementing this framework at a local level through our careers hubs. Integrating careers education into mainstream education is crucial because it ensures that every student has access to valuable career preparation from an early age. By reimagining work experience to be more than just a one-off activity, starting it earlier and closely linking to skill development, we can provide young people with meaningful opportunities to explore potential career paths and gain practical experience. This approach helps students make more informed decisions about their future, equipping them with the skills needed for success in the workforce. And finally, we've seen how careers education can help young people to overcome barriers and address disadvantage. To further support this effort, we have to focus on upskilling the careers workforce, drawing insights from successful practices, such as those that we've seen in SEND institutions. Additionally, we need to enhance digital systems for early risk identification with greater precision. These measures aim to boost young people's career readiness and prevent them from becoming NEET. Great, and that's everything for me.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you, Alex, for those insights. We've had a range of questions in advance, and we've got some more questions to come. And there's a few things which I think might be useful for us to put. One of the questions which has emerged is about, not just in terms of OECD averages, but how does the UK, or sorry, England, compare in terms of, what best looks like in different areas. And so let me share with you just 3 more slides, which I think is going to be interesting to people to see sort of these country by country comparisons. Here we're looking at OECD countries. Well, you also have data from about 40 non-OECD countries, and our plan is in time to be able to publish more and more of this. But this is your first real sort of like insight. Now, I've got 3 activities to show you. 2 England does very well on, 1 it doesn't do so well on. It doesn't do very well at all on, in terms of participation in comparison to other countries. Now, we start with job shadowing or worksite visits. And we're big fans of job shadowing, particularly around the age of 15 to 16. We have a publication on it where we look at effective practice around the world. Worksite visits are also very useful. That authentic exposure to the world of work is very powerful for young people. It's a form of career engagement which is very strongly associated with better outcomes. Now, England, in terms of this, is not doing so well, or didn't do so well last time. 2018 did a lot better. But these are the countries here we see which are showing what can be done, where more than half, 2/3 or more of students are engaging in these workplace visits, job shadowing, get a chance to see for themselves, kind of a range of jobs, investigate for themselves, and that's, I think, particularly useful at this age. But if you look at two other areas, one's about a job fair. Well, England is much better on that. Students are much more likely to visit a job fair. Now, when we ask the question in PISA, we don't always know what type of job fair it is. We would recommend job fairs which bring them into contact with people who are well placed to give them authentic insights into different professions and trades. But you can see here that sort of like England is doing very well compared to other OECD countries. And then if we look at, have you ever spoken to a career advisor? Now, again, England does well. I mean, it is remarkable. Many of these countries, we've got a quarter to a third, maybe half or more in some countries where students haven't spoken to a career advisor. Career advisors, again, we don't know a lot about the quality of the interactions, but we do know that when students speak to a career advisor, we can do the analysis on the big PISA data set. That, when you control for their academic ability, their social background, their gender, and so on, they're more likely to have, clear ideas for the future. They're more likely to have plans for their education and for their jobs which are aligned. They're more likely to be more ambitious. They're more likely to demonstrate some of that extrinsic motivation that I believe education will help. So these are some questions which people are kind of interested in. There's a wealth of data on PISA. We could talk for the next 24 hours about it, but let me stop sharing there and ask perhaps firstly, so Alex and then Lucy, you might want to come in about some of the broader themes we had people asking questions about, particularly when they were registering for the session. It was something which was referred to earlier about engaging early. We focus a lot about career thinking. We think that is a really important form. And in some ways, that's probably the things which really drives, a young person's career development. But we know, as I was suggesting just, that the career thinking of a person is, is significantly associated with their engagement, kind of with a range of career development activities. And the more they do, the stronger signs they are that they're sort of more on track. I know in England that you're looking at not only just lower secondary, but also primary education for young people under the age of 11. And that's something which we at the OECD see as something which is very positive. But it'd be interesting, perhaps, Alex, initially to take your take on why the English government is seeing this is an important area of development. And perhaps there's also an opportunity to raise any questions which you have or comments you want to make on the breadth of the data which we've seen, but also sort of like what Lucy had to say. And then Lucy will come back to you.
Grant, thank you, Anthony. Just checking that you can hear me. Perfect, wonderful. So obviously, as you've alluded to there, Anthony, careers education isn't a sort of one-stop shop when you're 15. It is something which is part of your journey, and it's not just your journey through childhood, it's your journey through adulthood as well. And what we try to make sure is that we have a good gradated system of careers, activities and interventions and education throughout the secondary school system, which is sort of fairly well established now, which CEC supports schools and colleges to push through. And it's worth noting that we have seen sort of our career engagement scores increase significantly over the last 5-6 years, as measured by Gatsby benchmarks, from 2.1 up to 5.5 Gatsby benchmark attainment in the most recent data. Obviously, sort of noting there that we still want to go sort of further improve that. But that really, as Lucy was saying, does make sure that we are sort of making sure that we are having sensible conversations at sensible points with our children and young people. making sure that they have access to support. And there was I'm going to slightly answer a question which is in the chat at the same time here as well. Making sure that they've got a good understanding of the range of skills and qualifications options open to them. So we've strengthened what we call the provider access legislation, the Baker Clause within the education system. And this is a requirement to allow for technical providers to be allowed access to a school, to be talking about some of those vocational routes. And we've lowered the age at which that is a requirement down to year 8, so ages sort of 12 to 13 there. Again, just sort of making sure that people don't get siloed into a way of thinking early on, so that we're able to influence and broaden minds and thinking in our children and young people sort of at a slightly earlier age. And that's also the drive of what we're trying to do in the sort of primary space as well. It's, careers education in primary schools isn't about, you should be doing this job. It's about breaking down those stereotypes which you noted towards the end, and making sure that everybody feels as if has a full the full suite of options available to them, and they sort of understand that the full suite of options can be available to them if it is right for them. Probably worth there if I pause and then let Lucy jump in.
Great, and can kind of speak to the early ages and to the technical education pieces as well. Completely agree with that. Making sure that all students have all available information and are exposed all throughout their secondary education and earlier, as far as possible, to as much information about as many things as possible. We're moving far, far, far from the traditional system of a 6-year-old being told you can either be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, and that's kind of it. So it's amazing to be able to be moving into the space where more and more information is available, and partnering with external organizations to make this possible and available. And then in terms of kind of the apprenticeships and technical education routes, like we have so many things that need to align before a young person would decide to go down a technical or a vocational pathway. So we need like labour market demand, employers offering the right opportunities, accessible information, good careers education, being close to learners. And at the moment we have all of these things, but not everywhere, not evenly distributed. So we think that that's the next kind of port of call for careers education, of making this something that is so widely accessible, so widely available, offers available from organizations as well. So that's kind of where we're sitting at the moment. But yeah, it's really great to see kind of how the system's moving at the moment. It feels like a very promising time to be involved in it.
I mean, certainly with primary, challenging stereotypes is very clear. We've done studies with students as young as 5, and you can just ask them, what sort of things they think about, and immediately, and it tends to be boys more than girls really at that age. Very stereotypical view. But I think the thing which we think is perhaps, really important here is helping students see the link between what they're doing in the education and who they might become later on, but also to really spark that culture of curiosity you want to see as they go through education. I wanted to pick up on I think a question which is seems to be dominating the chat as I look at it, which is around engagement with employers, around particularly work experience. Now, we saw the data, we call them internships here, that's our data, but I can kind of reassure people that in England, that internships is not a word that's used very often for school work placements. It's something associated much more with older people, with students or people in their 20s. But in the questionnaire in England that was adapted, so it was asked, have you taken place in an internship or a work placement? And we found about 1/3 of young people did between the ages of 15 and 16. And that is that's a form of exposure where our evidence points towards kind of strong long-term outcomes for young people. Now, it's a little bit complex because we've got very good evidence that if you work part-time in a workplace under direction of a manager, at 15 to 16, you'll do better later on than comparable people. If you volunteer in the community as well, you do better. And similarly, you're doing tasks under a direction On internship or work placements, there are fewer studies, and they're not quite as clear and all pointing in the same direction. And we'd love there to be more work there. It is a hot topic, as I understand, in England at the moment. Alex, what are some of the issues for you in thinking about the future of work placements and internships at 15?
So yes, certainly we do sort of view work experience and experience of the workplace as sort of a fundamental part of a young person's careers, education, and sort of I think without sort of go too methodological, there is, as you point out, there is a slight methodological conversation about sort of that number, and certainly when I saw the number of 29% in the study, that sort of did jump out at me as a startling figure. It is worth reflecting, and I think Lucy, you might be able to sort of jump in a moment. That Gatsby benchmark 6, which is experiences of the workplace for 2023, has a sort of higher figure. I think it's around 75-77%.
That's right.
But sort of nevertheless, that sort of still doesn't detract from the fundamental point which you did make there, Anthony. And one of the key things as well, it isn't just the fact that we sort of get good numbers sort of people getting access to work experience, but that we've got parity of access to work experience. Because not only does it help drive sort of a person through their career, it is one of those things which does promote social mobility and allows somebody to break through some of those barriers. It's a key thing which we are trying to work and support via CEC, lots of engagement with employers to come in with colleges and students, and I won't steal Lucy's thunder within that. But I also think it's worth reflecting that there is a sort of delivery challenge, which I've noticed people referring to in the chat, both from a sort of school's ability to sort of provide that sort of traditional sort of work experience in 2-week block, and also then an employer's ability to do that as well. So one of the things, so we are very much sort of thinking about how do we ensure and how do we try to find ways to break through that delivery challenge, and that's sort of one of the things which we'll be sort of exploring and trying to be setting out in our sort of future strategy thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Lucy, can I say 1 minute for you, because we have to finish on the dot.
Oh yeah, of course. Thanks. Yeah, so completely agree with all the points there as well. But we're thinking about what's the best way to reinvent work experience so that it's little and often, so that each of the right student has the right exposure to the right type of work experience, not just a tick box exercise of they went somewhere for 2 weeks and that's the way that it is now. So looking into those types of things, so targeted provision, equity of provision, and kind of making sure that the capacity is there. Yeah, back to you, Anthony.
Right. I think we could go on for another couple of hours, given the richness of the discussion on the chat. Lots of questions, which particularly just had one on students with special educational needs, learning and physical disabilities, where our data is not very good, to be honest. But we're very aware that there are additional barriers there, and good career guidance, good career development makes a huge difference. The studies which are available point in that direction. We are planning to publish over the next 2 months short papers on work placements, internships, and secondary education, but also how schools can make the most of when students work part-time or volunteer in the community, because these are great opportunities for students to gain first-hand experience under direction of a supervisor in a real physical workplace. It's a big complex area, and there are lots of national variations in terms of how the education system works and what the best place is for something like that. But the experience himself, all the data points towards being hugely helpful. We're also planning to publish on green guidance soon, which is another sort of like hot topic. Expect over the next 4 weeks for a paper to come out there. And if you do want to stay in touch with us, perhaps one of my colleagues can put our career.readiness@oecd.org email address in. And remember, next week we have our symposium on the use of digital technologies in career guidance. And there you'll see that we have models. Finland's are very interesting, but it exists in England as well, of virtual work experience placements. They haven't been properly evaluated yet. And we're very interested over time to see if we can start evaluating how they can work and do they provide a comparable experience or a better experience than what young people are experiencing. Have a look at the paper. It's out now. I should say this is not a full review. We didn't travel to England. We haven't sort of like done a full analysis of the whole system. This is just the data. And what we point out from the data, from what we know from elsewhere about why some things are more important than other things. So have a look at that. I just have to kind of thank Alex and Lucy for their time today. I have to thank John, Diaz and Sarah, Zapata Posada for all their hard work in creating the paper, but also sort of like colleagues at DFE who helped make this work, Annie and Ellie and Susan. We much appreciate kind of your support. And exactly on the hour, now's the time for us to come to an end and say, go read the paper. It's 96 pages long. There's a lot of data in there, huge amounts of data, probably the richest data set that certainly the OECD has ever been able to produce. And we're very pleased to have worked with England for this first full data analysis of the PISA data on career education. So thanks everybody much for your time this afternoon or this morning or this evening. Let me wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.